Hi there! We are Group 5 and we are here to talk about gender fair language. According to my research, two principal strategies have been employed to make languages gender fair and to treat women and men symmetrically. So neutralization is achieved, for example, by replacing male masculine forms, for example, policeman, with gender unmarked forms, for example, police officer, whereas feminization relies on the use of feminine forms to make female reference visible.
So good day to everybody. My name is Casmira Tion B. Espinosa, and I will be reporting the first subtopic for Chapter 5, Gender Fair Language, which is the language and gender relations. So to start the report, we have the first question: what is language? So it says here that it is a potent tool for how humans understand and participate in the world. So as we know, language is a medium, or it is a vehicle wherein it helps us communicate with other people, and it helps us understand their statements and their arguments. So for the second one is we have language defines men and women differently as seen in common adjectives associated with these genders. So in this statement, it could be associated with gender polarization, which I will be explaining later in the video. So as language defines men and women, it is not always on the positive side. Now, it also has its negative side, and one good example for that would be stereotyping. And that leads us to the next slide, which is about violations of gender fair language. So, as we know that sexist language is a tool that reinforces unequal gender relations, and there are three types. First, we have sex role stereotypes. Sex role stereotypes is basically just being against the other gender, or you're being gender focused, okay? In this situation, we are more focused with men compared to women. Now, as an example for this, we have the mindset of people being fine with men just being lazy all day. They could just lay down in bed all day without getting yelled at or whatever. But when it comes to women, women are obliged to clean the house, just do all the chores, and they wouldn't look decent if they just lay down in bed whole day. So that is stereotyping. Next, we have microaggression. So as an example of microaggression would be a girl walking in a dark alley and seeing a guy in a hoodie. So as their instinct, she immediately took a taser, or let's say a pepper spray, out of her purse because she thinks that the guy is a robber, or let's say a kidnapper, whatever. And that is somehow microaggression, because even though the guy does not have any intention even to just communicate with the girl, the girl immediately just took out her weapon to defend herself, even though that she doesn't know if the guy really is a robber or is just an ordinary person who doesn't really care about her. Okay, so that's somehow microaggressions. Lastly, we have sexual harassment. All of us already know what this means, and sexual harassment can be done physically or verbally, and unfortunately, most women have to go through this. So next, for invisibilization of women, we have three categories. So the first one, we have the generic use of masculine pronouns, or the use of a masculine general. So the use of the word mankind assumes that men are representative of all people on this planet. Since the late eras, it has been accepted by the society that men are superior compared to women. So women would settle being the ones following men. As an example for this, in language, we have saying guys when referring to a mixed gender. So typically when we call our colleagues, our friends, our family, or whoever we call, we tend to say guys, right? So saying guys to everybody regardless of gender still calls out a huge attention to male, and it gives them a stronger presence, because then again, in language, when we say guys, it's already understood that it is referring to male. But because of the way we use the language, we use the word guys for everybody, including women. So for the second category, we have the assumption that certain functions or jobs are performed by men instead of both genders. So said here in the picture, sorry, you are simply not the right man for the job. Now going back to sex role stereotypes, saying that men are only allowed to work and women are just there to take care of their kids, clean the house, and stuff like that. So as an example, the farmers and their wives tilled the land, and the politicians and their wives lobbied for change. So as you can see, when describing the guy, they had to use their job titles. When it comes to women, their identity is only remained as, or settled as, wives. Now, for the last category for this topic is the use of male job titles or terms ending in man to refer to functions that may be given to both genders. So, as we know, most of the time when we hear jobs such as businessman, chairman, policeman, it gives a stronger presence to men because it calls out their gender. So for us to refrain the invisibilization of women in this area, what we can do is to change the way we use the words. Now, instead of saying policeman, we could say police officer. Instead of saying fireman, we could say firefighters. So next we have the trivialization of women. So first, bringing attention to the gender of a person if that person is a woman. When we hear the word business or businessman, the first thing we think is that, oh, this is a job for men. Another one would be security guard. So let's say a person with that kind of mindset saw a guard who is actually female. So that person might say that she is a lady guard. With that being said, the person with that type of mindset brings attention to the gender because what he or she thinks is that when you're a guard, you should be a guy. Another example would be male nurse because as we were young, we used to think that doctors are guys and nurses are girls. And with that kind of mindset, you would think na, oh, he is a male nurse. And you try to bring the attention of the gender because it is not common for guys to be nurses. So there is girl athlete as well and male nanny. So next we have the perception of women as immature. As an example, women being labeled as darling or baby, making them appear childlike or juvenile. So in a situation, let's say there is a guy who wants to bring down a girl. One of their ways as to how they're able to do that is to call them names that could make them feel that they're down or that could sound like they are juvenile. So third is the objectification or likening to objects of women. So as an example, by being called honey, chick, or sweet, women become devalued, especially in an environment that merits formality. It is just similar with what I've said earlier than this. Say a guy purposely devaluing a woman. So what they do is they call them names or they would catcall them names that make women sound juvenile or childlike. This usually happens in an environment that merits formality. For example, this can happen in workplaces such as in the office and clinics. So next we have fostering unequal gender relations. So the use of man and wife assumes that men are still men and women identifies are subsumed. So as men think that they have created a strong reputation to the society, they would gladly say that they are men because they thought that they have created a very good reputation by being superior. When it comes to women, they are subsumed. When we say subsumed, it's like changing. So basically their identities are subsumed or changing because in the society they have not really created a superior reputation compared to men. So next we have gender polarization of words in use of adjectives. So gender polarization states that societies tend to define femininity and masculinity as polar opposite genders such that male acceptable behaviors and attitudes are not seen as appropriate for women and vice versa. Now going back to sex role stereotypes, as an example, men are only allowed to work and women can just work as housewives only and they're not allowed to apply for jobs. When it comes to using adjectives, now as an example in an advertisement, there is a male and a female who were tasked to lead a team. Now as the audiences watched this, what they described the man is that as the man led the team, they thought that the man was a good boss. But when it comes to the women leading the team, they thought that the woman was bossy. And now you can see the differences between the adjectives and you can see that there is gender polarization. Now lastly, we have hidden assumption. So hidden assumption in sentences can also be forms of microaggression if the underlying perceptions are sexist and degrading. So an example for this would be a father temporarily taking care of their children because the mother is the main caregiver. So as you can see, there is stereotyping there because they always think that the men should always work and the women should always be the one taking care of the children and they should only settle as housewives.
Hello everyone, my name is Hyson KB Serrano and I will be talking about Philippine culture and language. Filipino culture comprises a blend of traditional Filipino and Spanish Catholic traditions, with the influence from America and other parts of Asia. Filipino or Tagalog is mainly gender neutral. without gender characteristics or titles for men and women, meaning Filipino or Tagalog dialect is applicable to both genders, men or women. Words that are gendered came from another culture, which were adopted after 400 years of colonization. The values and shaping of the educational system were influenced by Western powers and ideals. Filipino portray a mix of identities, an infusion of both native and foreign perspective and values. Meaning, despite the long years of colonization, Filipinos acknowledge the values and cultures they have learned from different colonizers. And instead of sticking to a past version of our culture, they fuse both native and foreign perspective as well as values. Just like our Philippine culture and language we know today and probably in the future, as the Philippines continues to adapt openly through diversity.
Now we're going to discuss about identities and naming things. But first, what is identity? So identity is a characteristic that distinguishes a person or a group from others. So this is basically a descriptor that gives other a chance to have a quick judgment or assumptions about us. So this identity separates us from others. This gives us the sense of uniqueness. Now we have a lot of types of identities. Now first we have the gender identity. So it has been discussed in the previous chapters about what is gender and sexuality. So that goes with the gender identities. So this identity is basically shaped by a lot of factors, and one of them is gender and sex, which has been discussed from the previous chapters. So in order for us to define this gender, like for example to define feminine, what is masculine, and what is outside the feminine and masculine, we need the language. This language is a tool used for understanding the world as well as naming and describing people and things. So this also gives us the power to define oneself, the external world, and one's place in it. So this language can reflect who we are, our own gendered identities, and battle the definitions that the societies impose them. For example, contradicting what the society has named us, so we can prove ourselves through language. Now, naming things. So aside from language, we also have naming things as a power. This names is originally defined as something that provides the primary means in which a person is known, and that also is applicable to some things, like for example strange events or an unusual thing that hasn't been given a name yet, like for example sexual harassment. So this issue was never it has been experienced, but this issue wasn't really talked about because it doesn't have a name. It is described only as a unwanted behavior, but since it doesn't have a name, it was ignored and treated like this issue doesn't exist. Now, since it has been given a name now by defining and describing the act, it helped the women around the world to actually act upon it, and not only the women but some also are providing supports to battle this issue. Another issue we have is the date rape, but since it doesn't have a name before, women are only given a chance to actually explain what they have experienced. That is why it goes on with a saying wherein it states that naming experiences can help people come to terms with their issues. Now, if you know how to define, to describe what you have experienced, and maybe you can tell others what that is and help them come up with some solutions regarding that issue. Another thing that has been given as a problem that has no name was written in the book of Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystic, in 1963. So in this book, it talks mostly about structural oppression. So here it was described that the middle class housewives felt discontented in the United States in 1950 to 1960. So this is because even if they have their basic needs met, they feel like they don't have a total control of their lives, so they have the inability to control their lives fully because the society has given them limits. The society has enforced them on some reproductive rules. That is actually unfair when you try to really look and analyze the situation between this oppression.
Hello everyone, I'm College Engineer Meeting. I will be discussing about the sexist language and culture. Sexist language refers to words and phrases that demean, ignore, or stereotype members of either sex or that needlessly call attention to gender. Sexism in language affects consciousness, perception of reality, encoding and transmitting cultural meaning and socialization. Sexist language can take in several forms. A pronoun that denotes a single sex with the information being conveyed pertains equally to either or both sexes. A job title that links to a single sex when either sex can perform the job. For example, policeman, fireman, and mailman. A single sex pronoun in conjunction with a neutral job title, so that the implication is that the job belongs to a single sex. Any other use of language that unnecessarily and arbitrarily makes gender distinction. Sexist language is a gender bias which can occur consciously and unconsciously. When unconscious, the gender biases language can be considered to be a product of society. Other people use sexist language and repetition normalizes it until the speaker unconsciously produces his or her own sexist language, where men are the norm and the women the other. Common error that shows gender bias is assuming the subject of all sentences male. Common themes of sexist language: commercialization, trivialization. Normalization of sexism makes violence against women and children acceptable and tolerable. Language, through its repetition of roles, stereotypes, and adjectives, affects on how one person enacts his or her capabilities, constantly mocking or joking about women or LGBT, sexualizing them and making them appear weak would indeed make them internalize these ideas. That being said, language is not inherently sexist. Being sexist depends on a specific culture. The attitude of a culture towards a certain gender may influence the words used, creating sexist language. Language is both a symptom and perpetrator of sexism, and is the very telling of how a society sees a certain gender.
Towards gender-fair language. The gender-fair language was made with the intention of reducing and avoiding gender stereotyping and discrimination. Journalistic writing should treat and write males and females as equals with gender-neutral language. Examples of these gender-neutral languages are: instead of saying cameraman, it will be changed to camera operator. Policeman will be changed to police officer, and waiter or waitress will be changed to server. People like Liza Massa, the president and representative of Gabriela, or the General Assembly binding women for reforms, integrity, equality, leadership, and action. She has gone the extra mile of making policies and banning sexist language in the official communications and documents of the House of Representatives. The use of gender-fair language in educational institutions and the removal of sexist language is currently being advocated. These steps people took will ensure that gender-fair language is more than a collection of words, but a change in the sexist world we live in. Cultures and values come from language and vice versa. Language process that represents one's views, beliefs, and experiences. It must be changed to reflect the changes in our world, as well as to be free from bias, since words can affect how a person sees oneself and others around him or her. So that's it about Chapter 5, Gender Fair Language. Thank you for listening.